All right, everybody, welcome back. Let's jump right into this deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a closer look at Freeport-McMoRan, ticker symbol FCX. They're a mining company. A lot of interesting things going on with them, at least according to what we're seeing in the markets.
Yeah, and when I look at Freeport-McMoRan, I immediately think copper. And that's kind of the lens that a lot of these sources are taking with this. They're really looking at the copper market, broadly speaking, and thinking about how FCX is positioned.
Yeah. I mean, this is a good time to be, I don't want to say a good time to be in the copper market, but certainly a time when there's a lot of action in the copper market because you have all of these things that are pointing towards much higher copper demand going forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in fact, the source that we have here is saying that they think that FCX is really poised to kind of capitalize on this and, really be a leader in the space.
So they've got a couple things going for them, right? The first is that they're already one of the biggest copper producers in the world. But on top of that, they're actually planning to substantially increase production in the next couple of years through a couple of different mechanisms.
Yeah, that's right. And this is really kind of the meat of the analysis in terms of why this source is so bullish. There are these four major projects, four major things that they're doing that I think are worth unpacking a little bit.
Okay, so let's get into it. What's the first one?
The first one here, it's called the Leach Project. And so basically what they're doing is they're going back to these old kind of mining sites where they had previously extracted copper, and they're using this new technology, this new process called leaching, to extract even more copper from these kind of what they're calling, like tailings or leftovers.
So they're basically like squeezing more juice out of the orange.
Yeah, exactly right. And, it's interesting because it's sort of seen as being a little bit more environmentally friendly as well, at least in theory. And then on top of that, just to give you a sense of the scale of this, they're expecting to get something like 800 million pounds of copper every year from this project alone.
800 million pounds of copper per year.
Yeah, per year.
Just from reprocessing this old, what'd you call it, tailings?
The tailings, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's one project, and that's pretty impressive, but like you said, that's only one of four.
Yeah.
What's next?
So the next one they have here is in Arizona. It's this mine called the Baghdad Mine. And basically what they're doing there is they are undergoing this pretty massive expansion. So they're going to be, or at least they're planning to, more than double the amount of copper that they're pulling out of the ground there.
So what does that mean in terms of numbers? Like how much more copper are we talking about?
Yeah, so in terms of like the actual pounds, it's a little bit hard to say just because obviously they're not giving like, super exact projections.
Yeah.
But it's something along the lines of it being able to, the amount of copper that they're going to be pulling out of there, it would be enough to supply like 500,000 electric vehicles per year.
Wow.
In terms of the copper that's in there.
Okay. That makes sense. So we've got this, the Leach Project, which is kind of like a new way of doing things, reprocessing the old tailings. We've got the Baghdad mine in Arizona, which is this massive expansion. They've got two more projects. Are those both expansions, or is there something else going on?
Yeah, so the next one that they have on here is actually another expansion. This one is at a mine called El Abra, and it is in Chile.
Okay.
And this one is interesting because it actually involves partnering with, I believe it's the Chilean National Copper Company.
Oh, interesting. So there's a kind of a geopolitical angle to this one as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, in terms of the amount of copper that they're expecting to get out of there, it's a little bit less than the Baghdad mine, but still very significant. We're talking something like 750 million pounds per year.
Okay, 750 million. So just to put that in perspective, that's almost as much as they're going to be getting from that Leach Project, which is reprocessing all of that old material. That's a lot of copper. All right, so we've got the Leach Project, Baghdad mine expansion, El Abra expansion in Chile. What's the fourth and final piece of this copper puzzle?
The fourth one is interesting. It's actually a new development. It's a new mine. It's called the Kuseng Liar Mine, and this one is in Indonesia. And this one's interesting, I think, for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's, from what I understand, it's a pretty significant copper deposit. It's going to be a major source of copper for them. But the other thing that's interesting about it is that it's going to be, at least according to the source, it's going to be a big driver of job creation and economic development in the region.
Okay. And when are they expecting to actually start pulling copper out of the ground there?
Yeah, so this one is a little bit further out. They're saying that production is supposed to start sometime before 2030, so still a few years away.
Okay, so we've got all of this copper coming out of the ground, right? I mean, Hundreds of millions of pounds of copper from these different projects, but that's only half of the equation, isn't it? You have to do something with the copper
Yeah.
once you get it out of the ground. You have to be able to process it and sell it. So what are they doing on that front?
That's right. And that's where this smelter comes in.
The smelter.
Yeah. So they have this smelter in Indonesia, and it's actually nearing completion, which is a huge deal because it's going to give them a lot more control over the entire supply chain. So instead of having to ship the raw copper ore to other countries to be processed, they're going to be able to do it all in-house, which is going to save them money and also give them a lot more flexibility.
Okay, so it's more efficient and potentially saves them some money. But there's more to this smelter than just efficiency, right?
Right, you're exactly right, because it's also a big part of their strategy for securing their long-term access to copper in Indonesia. So they have these operating rights in Indonesia that are currently set to expire in 2041. But by building this smelter, they're essentially, putting down roots. They're making a big investment in the country.
So they're kind of like endearing themselves to the Indonesian government and hopefully making it more likely that they will extend those operating rights past 2041.
Exactly right. It's all about building those relationships and showing that they're committed to being a long-term partner in the region.
Okay, so that's a really strategic move on their part. It makes a lot of sense. Now, we've talked about all the positive things going on with FCX, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the potential risks and challenges.
Yeah, of course. I mean, no investment is without risk, right? And, mining in particular is a tough business. So there are definitely some things that could go wrong here.
So what are some of the, yellow flags or red flags that you're seeing? What do we need to be aware of?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is just the execution risk around these projects, right? We're talking about some really ambitious timelines here. I mean, they want to significantly ramp up production in a relatively short period of time, and these things can always be delayed. I mean, these are big, complicated projects, especially when you're talking about something like the Indonesian smelter. There could be unforeseen technical challenges, there could be regulatory hurdles, all sorts of things that could pop up. So I think that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Right, because if they run into major delays or cost overruns, that could really throw a wrench in their plans.
Exactly. And then the other thing, I think it's always something to be mindful of when you're talking about a company that operates in multiple countries around the world, particularly in the mining industry, is the political and regulatory environment. I mean, things can change so quickly in this industry, especially when you're dealing with governments that may not always be, the most stable. So that's always a risk.
And, it's not just like these grand geopolitical shifts. I mean, even on a smaller scale, if a local community in Chile or Indonesia decides that they don't want FCX operating there anymore and they start protesting, even that can have a pretty significant impact on the company's ability to operate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you make a great point. It's not just about the big picture stuff. It's about those local relationships and making sure that everyone feels like they're benefiting from the project.
Okay. So we've got a good sense of FCX's growth plans, the potential rewards and the risks. But before we wrap up, I think it's important to connect this back to the bigger picture. We're on the cusp of this massive global energy transition, right? We're moving away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy sources like solar and wind power. And at the same time, we're seeing this huge surge in the adoption of electric vehicles. And guess what all of these things have in common? They all require a ton of copper.
That's right. I mean, copper is basically the unsung hero of the clean energy transition.
So if this transition is going to succeed, companies like FCX are going to play a critical role.
Exactly right. And so you have to think, if this demand for copper really does materialize the way that a lot of people are expecting it to, what does that mean for a company like FCX that's, really well positioned to capitalize on that?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Exactly.
All right, well, on that note, that's our deep dive on Freeport-McMoRan, a company at the forefront of the global copper market. Thanks for joining us.